Today I'm going to answer 5 common questions that I've had with the L322 over the previous sort of 6 and 7 months while this thing has been out of action. Hello everybody, I'm Mark from Overlanding Forward and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to answer 5 common questions that I've had with the L322 over the previous sort of 6 and 7 months while this thing has been out of action. And so we'll go through those and hopefully they'll be of interest to you. So before we get started, probably about last August or September, Andrew St. White at 4X Overland put out a video to do with the Canning stock route. And the reason behind that they did a trip in his 40-year-old two-door Range Rover Classic. Now that trip was trying to prove whether a stock 40-year-old odd Range Rover could do the Canning stock route pretty much without any problems. And for all intents and purposes, it made it. There were a few niggly little things, but it made it, which was more than could be said for the other vehicles on that trip. Now, if you follow Mr. Andrew St. White's channel, you know that he's in love with Toyota Troopies. He just seems to have this affinity for them. And despite the fact that he doesn't think he's a Toyota fanboy, I think those that watch the channel know that he is. And the fact that most of us probably cringe when we know that he's had one of his Coca-Cola induced fits, we know where he comes from. So one of these things, although he is a big Range Rover fan, and I give him credit for that, I think he does like Range Rovers. I do think he does like Land Rover's products. One of the things that came out of that Canning stock route trip was his Toyota Troopy had an ABS sensor go out. And his comment was, I'm just wondering whether a brand new Defender, if an ABS sensor tripped, whether it would keep on going. That caused quite a stir where Simon from Powerful UK, who clearly watches 4X Overland, has a brand new Defender and thought, I'm up for the challenge. Took his vehicle into his garage, popped the ABS sensor, took it for a ride around the block, did a video of it and said, hey Andrew, they keep on running. So Mr. St. White put out yet another video doubling down on electronics, yada, 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 and it just kept on going. Now, a whole bunch of people piled on. I did, because once again, you're seeing this Toyota-centric view of the world that, you know, solid axles, electronics, all of that stuff was going backwards and forwards, air suspension, unreliable, etc. Anyway, fast forward to what's going on at the moment. There is a company, and I'll put the link in the description. There's a company in Australia called Drifta AU. There's a really interesting character called Luke who runs Drifta. He is now doing the Canning stock route. So he's got a Toyota 79, one of the long ones. He's basically packed up with a bunch of mates and he's doing the Canning stock route in reverse. So from well 1 at the bottom to well 30 odd at the top, I think it is. Anyway, the really cool thing about this is one of the vehicles that's going with him is a Discovery LR4 or D4, which means, as far as I know, and I've asked questions, is that thing as stock as possible? It does have air suspension. I believe it's on 18-inch wheels and 18-inch tires. But if you go and look at the video, they're posting, they've got a Starlink and they're posting every day. Some of it you might find a bit boring. They've got a guy there, an Aboriginal guy, who I actually found quite fascinating, who's on the trip with him. So in the morning, they wake up at like 5 o'clock, sun comes up. They're talking about all the Aboriginal ways of life against sort of white Western world, which I do find quite interesting. But anyway, Go and have a look at that video series. They're probably about 2 or 3 days into the canning stock route. They believe it will take them about 2.5, 3 weeks to do. But let's see whether that D4 makes it. Let's see whether the D4 has any issues. I don't know how honest they're going to be about if there are any faults or anything that happened. But anyway, for shits and giggles, go follow it along and let's see what happens when they get to the end of that. And rest assured, I will be one of the people that will be posting links to that a Discovery D4, LR4, made the canning stock route pretty much stock. So we'll see. Okay, so back to the common questions that I've had while this thing was in the shop, basically being rebuilt. So what's quite interesting is that before this went in, I had my Heritage Studio lights on the back of the vehicle on the roof rack, and then I ran the cables. So I'm not taking credit for this, but I've had many, many people saying, how on earth did you run the cables from the back of the vehicle up to the roof? So I've taken a video here. So if you look at this, you can see that what I've done, and I don't take credit for this actually. So Max at Land Rover Passion showed me how to do this. If you pop off the rear speaker guards, you can clearly see on the D pillar at the back how it's basically been spot welded together. So as the goalposts on the back, which is the frame at the back, has been spot welded together to the side pieces, it's got a gap. And the gap is probably anywhere from, what's that, 2 or 3 inches to about that. Now where I've drilled mine is halfway down is where it's at its thinnest. So you have to take the rear speaker grill off. You can clearly see how it's sort of molded around the back, and it is molded. But you can see where that piece is, and if you can work out, I probably can take some measurements for you. Anyway, that's where I drilled it. So I started off with, I think it was a 5mm drill, then went to a 6 and then got a 10mm drill, and then put a step drill in to get into there. So there is just enough room to allow the drill to do its thing. So if you drill in through the first hole, because you're hitting up against that second piece of cavity, just let the drill sort of work its way through or go through, and then you've got the hole, the pilot hole to go through. So that's how I drilled it. So I put, there are about 3 layers of outside sheathing on that wire, and then I wrapped it in electrical tape as well. The reason why I did it, and there's no grommets in there, is that I could not get the wires through without making a bigger hole, and I didn't want to do that. So there is no way that's going to rub through. I actually Sikaflex the whole of the hole, put the wires in both sides, so from the outside going in, and then from there, Sikaflex both sides in. So it does provide some level of cushioning around it. So again, there's no grommet in it. And before you all start screaming and shouting and saying, I should have put a grommet in, yes, but the hole would have been pretty damn big with the grommet to be able to get that in. So I'm pretty happy. It's been there. It did the Volta when we went to Spain. No problems in there at all. And like I said, it's probably about quadruple sheathed with electrical tape, and then the wiring itself is double sheathed as well. So that's how I did that. For my chase light, I've gone down the other side. So exactly the same thing. And you can see in the cut of the B-roll here, what I did was I got the sheathing that wraps around it and then zip tied it together, and it goes up through the gap where the hinge sits and then up, straight up for the roof rack, just to make it cleaner. But at the moment it works fine for the way it is. So anyway, that's how I did it. So a common question I get is also about my lithium battery. So the lithium battery back there is a Renogy 100 amp. It's not a Bluetooth version. I don't really need a Bluetooth version because I have my Red Vision system. It's bolted in the back. And this goes into a secondary question I get is, how on earth did you manage to get it to charge from the vehicle battery? Well, that's not working. The reason why is on 10 to 12, the CAN bus system, you cannot get a consistent 12 volt or C14 volts at the back to trigger my BMS system to tell it to start charging my auxiliary battery. So the only way to bypass it is to run a cable directly from the battery down through the firewall all the way to the back into the BMS. That way I've bypassed all the CAN bus systems, and it will then trigger off 14 volts for the BMS to be able to kick in and start charging my lithium battery. Now, how do I get around that today? So I'm not really burning through a huge amount on that battery. The lowest I've got it down to is about 35%. And that was not taking a charge for 4 days. So that was with the fridge running all day, some lights on, bunch of ancillaries that are all plugged into the back of that thing. So I'm pretty comfortable. I could probably go with the battery running for a week before it drains all the way down. But going into campsites, got shore power. I've got a solar blanket, which is 140 watt. Blanket. So if the sun is out, I can plug that thing in. It does put charge back into it. And then also got my Bluetti as well. So my Bluetti will actually charge that as well. So it becomes a 240 power bank, and I can plug in with 240 shore power into the back of my BBS, and that will charge it. So that's the battery. That's how it's charged. At some point, I will go run that cable through the firewall. Will at Utopia and I had a look at it last summer and gave up because we could not find a way of being able to get the battery out, ECU out, and run that cable. So I'll figure out, I'll get it somewhere at some point in time and get it done. My spare wheel, well, it's on the roof now. I'm not going to do that anymore. You don't want to hear about my spare wheel and tire. Yes, it's an emergency L322 space saver. That's all to be said. Yep, I know it's not going to do off-road. Yep, I know it's probably not exactly the same size as the tire profile I've got, but again, it's an emergency spare tire. I think we've done that to death. So this one's come up when I sold the rooftop tent and made the decision to get rid of it and go with different setups. The question came up is, or keeps coming up now, is how much weight do you think you've actually saved? So the rooftop tent was 68 kilos. And then you've got to add in all the other stuff that I used to carry up there. So things like my ARB hydraulic jack. I had a whole bunch of crap that was in my front runner bag, transit bag that was on the back. Now the tent is gone, so that's 68 gone. The rest of the stuff is still there. So the only thing that's really added weight back onto it is the spare is up there now, but that's pretty light. It's a fairly light space saver wheel. It's not as heavy as the full size one. The other bits and pieces, my Max Tracks are up there, but they were always up there anyway, hidden underneath my transit bag. So that's not extra weight. And then the two boxes. Well, the two boxes, they are Peli boxes. They're IM3220s. The stuff that's in there, recovery gear, I already had anyway. The only difference of what's inside this one is really lightweight camping gear. So things like my tarp, ground sheet, I think my cot's up there. There's a spare chair. And my Starlink, and that is not very heavy. So all of that is over here. So realistically, I probably saved, I'm going to guess, about 60 kilos of weight that has been taken off the roof by not having the rooftop tent. And because this is a pretty high vehicle, to be honest with you, I didn't really like the way that that rooftop tent looked on the vehicle. It made it just look bulky, and the shape was all wrong in my opinion. Now you could argue having two boxes up there makes it look different and makes it look bulky, but actually I quite like it. So anyway, that's how much I think I've shaved off. About 60 kilos of weight have been removed off this vehicle. Another common question I have, and I actually know somebody that bought one of these, is the kitchen at the back. So the kitchen at the back is a Nomad kitchen. There's a company in California. It's made of wood. It's really well made. They've got two really strong, I believe it can hold somewhere in the region of about 100 pounds of weight on those runners. So the runners on the drawers that pull it all out are really the only other pieces that are in there. The weight itself in the vehicle, it may be, I'm guessing it's about 15 kilos. It's roughly 25 pounds in weight. So what's that? 10 kilos, 12 kilos, something in the region of that. It stays in the back in the frame that I've built. There's no reason for me to take it out unless I really need to get into the back, and I don't need to do that now because my emergency spare is on the roof. So that is what it is. It's a company called Nomad Kitchen Company. I believe they are. I'll put a link in the description. I love it. And to be honest, it's a game changer. I keep my stoves in there. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I keep in there in the drawers that they've got. Yeah, and I love it. Another one that's come up quite a lot, especially when I said that I wanted to have something as a cover out the back. Now, my whole point about putting a cover out the back was I was running into issues where if it rained and I had that kitchen pulled all the way out, I was going to get wet. And because that's where my kitchen is and everything is at the back, I had no cover. And with the rooftop tent that folded that way, when I had the Defender, it was okay because I was cooking off my gull wing doors and I could hide underneath the rooftop tent where there was cover. This is different. So that's one reason why the rooftop tent went, and I was looking at something like an Oz tent. Well, that is on hold, and I've got these other versions of the setup that I'll show you over the coming weeks and months. So other people have said, why don't you get a 270 awning? Well, number one, they're big, they're bulky, and I had one on the Defender, and to be honest with you, I think I may have used it maybe half a dozen times. I think they're not necessary for my application. And the other thing you have is the tailgate, when it goes up, is going to bump up against some of the arms that are on the back there. So you're really not going to get the full head height underneath the tailgate that if it was all the way up, because the 270 awning on one of the arms that swing all the way out will bump in. So that's really not an option. And the other thing is 270 awnings are generally about 2.5 meters in length. This roof rack, front to back, is only 2 meters. So you're actually quite restricted on the options that you have. And I don't really like the fact that some of these awnings poke out the front or poke out the back. Now, if they poke out the front, you're going to be taking branches out and things like that. If they poke out the back, the tailgate won't go up. So you can sort of shuffle it in the middle, but then you've got 2.5 one end, 2.5 the other to make it all fit. Proportionally, it just looks wrong in my opinion. So that's why no 270 awning on the L322. I have been looking at 180 awnings that could go on the side, but again, you run into the same problem, is that some of those end up being 2.5 meters. There are a few that are 2 meters, but I have to question, whether I would use it. I did find one with Direct UK that had a 180 awning that could go out the back, but it's not very deep. And that's the other problem, is that I just don't think it's going to fit for me. So I'm actually quite happy with the tarp setup that I've got. So those are the 5 things, the spare tire doesn't count, that I've been asked on a fairly consistent basis now about what's going on with this vehicle, and then sort of the part of the overland build. I will say, I think I'm at the end. There is another video that I'll be putting out around the Egon water hub, which is behind me with my water heater. All of that is in. I now have 38-degree on tap, on demand water in this vehicle. And that to me is a game changer, because now you have piping hot water on demand, which I never had before. And so now I've got the ability to get a shower whenever I want. And I've tested it all out, and it's wonderful. A couple of other things that I'm going to look at doing, and this will probably happen into the autumn timeframe, is, and you can probably see over my shoulder, is that's the box that I built to hide the Egon water hub. There's a 4-liter air tank in there, and there's also the Aquios water tank heater. That is in the back. Now, this side of this vehicle was always built for the American market, where the 30-70 split is behind the back. The 30 is behind the back. So taking that out means this seat cannot go back any further. And I'm really, when the dimensions, when I built that, I'm really, really close on dimensions. So what I'm going to do, probably in the autumn, is I'm going to take the 70 split 2 seats out, put the 30 back in, shift this over, and then sort of remake all of that over here. So I will only end up with 1 seat, which will allow me to push my seat back a little further, but give me more space to build a new frame to house all of this stuff. So this was always going to be version 1, and I've got an in-depth video you can go look at around the Egon water hub and how I put all that together. So I'm pretty much going to look at building a version 2 sometime towards autumn into October. And you've seen me build these before, they're really easy. But I need to map out now. I've got some extra space. I'm going to put all of this in, and maybe I can put a drawer in here, or I can put some lift up boxes or something like that in there that allows me to store more stuff into the vehicle. probably with a flat space on top to load things on, like luggage and things like that. But anyway, that will be for probably an autumn project that I'll work on. So I hope this has been of interest to you. If it is, please don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends. Don't forget to click and subscribe, really helps the channel to grow. And with that, I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.